Hello and welcome to this, the sixth interview that we've been doing as part of Milton Keynes Business Leaders Partnership series, interviewing important and prominent people in Milton Keynes. And I would like to welcome the leader of Milton Keynes Council, Pete Marland. Thank you very much for joining us. Hello, Pete. How are you?
I'm not too bad. You?
Yeah, fine, thank you. Slightly nervous about this, but sure we'll get through it fine. And how are things going at the council? Well?
I keep saying I think you sign up for some things when you become leader of a council, but I'm not sure anybody would want to sign up for 3 months of what we've had. So it's been an interesting learning experience, as they say in code for absolutely awful experience in life. But I think we're on the right track. And coming out of it now, hopefully.
Yeah, it's been, I think, a very interesting and frightening experience for us all, business owners and council leaders alike, and everybody. It is incredible. But as you say, hopefully we're coming out the other side. So, without further ado, I'll go through my questions and hopefully get some answers. The first one is, throughout the pandemic, Milton Keynes Business Leaders Partnership has been reporting extensively on the situation and how it's developed. And we've often commented how rapidly Milton Keynes Council has put measures into place to provide community support throughout the crisis. For example, you've launched the emergency appeal and set up provisions for the vulnerable. So we were just wondering, how have the team coped throughout this period? And how were you able to set up the support network so quickly?
Well, I think the base of that question is the basis for any decent organisation, isn't it? And that is, we have quite a long-term plan for the city, and I've been in post now, I think it's over 6 years, and which is quite a long time for a leader of Milton Keynes. And it's from that strong foundations, really, and the strong team, particularly the leadership team, the CEO, Michael Bracey, and other people that we've brought in. I think that foundation and where we are as a local authority, everybody knows that we've had austerity for the past 10 years and the council's faced £116 million worth of cuts. But some of the partnerships that we have, particularly with the hospital, with the CCG, with organisations, both businesses and in the voluntary and charity sector, those were really good foundations for actually not when the first COVID-19 case happened, but if people think right back to actually when the first plane arrived of people from Wuhan, we've done this, and we've been doing this nearly a month longer than anybody else, because we had the sort of preparatory work when all those people came and had to come and stay at Kent's Hill. We did a lot of work doing that, and that, I think, helped us prepare for some of the things that would be needed during the pandemic, and helped us sort of really understand where we would have to go as a city. But I think in terms of the foundations, the fact that we're in a decent financial position in the city allowed us to be able to move money around quite quickly and nimbly, and the partnerships we've got with external organisations such as yours, the fact that we were able to talk to businesses, understand what their needs were, we were able to get that money out quickly when it arrived. I think all those basic principles, I think, mean that when a crisis does happen, you're able to react quickly. It's not about sort of panicking and going, oh, crisis. It's about not reinventing the wheel and actually being calm about things and taking decisions that about what people need.
It's an interesting point you make, because Milton Keynes has played it's more than its fair share on this throughout the pandemic, in terms of, you mentioned the setup at Kent's Hill, and of course the testing centre. So it is interesting that we've played our part and some. Thank you very much. During the pandemic, Milton Keynes Council has reportedly spent £350,000 tackling homelessness, and this was also a major part of your manifesto. Clearly, this is a great job and a real positive for the city. But I just wondered, going forward, can you explain more about that support, and going forward, what the plans are to continue to safeguard the homeless.
Yeah, so again, we come back to, unlike a lot of places where they have a homelessness issue, a rough sleeping issue, and it was the first money that they've actually spent on the issue in quite a long time. We're lucky in the city to both have an ongoing housing first policy, which means that we have already a network of help and support there for people who are sleeping rough. We have a no second night out policy. If any rough sleeper wants permanent and long-term accommodation in the city and other support, that we were already providing that. With the pandemic, what the pandemic allowed us to do was there was legislation there that actually meant that people were given, we were given extra support, and people were effectively forced off the street by, if they didn't want to stay on the street, they were given no other choice. And I think at one point we were down to sort of literally 4 or 5 people still rough sleeping, and that's a very, very difficult cohort. We housed about 100 people at one point or another in the travel lodge, but what was happening is we don't just take people and leave them. What that enabled us to do was then those people who have not engaged with the services already, it allowed us to engage with them in a way that possibly they'd been resisting before, and we've moved some of them onto more permanent accommodation. And when that money's finished, the money's finished now, and we're hopefully sort of looking at either buying the hotel or buying another large building to set up a hostel-like accommodation, but we don't necessarily want hostel accommodation. But in the meantime, all those people, we're not evicting anybody. We've offered them alternative accommodation, that either in a different hotel or other accommodation. And we've also offered them a support worker and a social worker, because a lot of people who are rough sleeping, it's not just that they lose a house and they end up on the street. Many people have long-term health effects, mental health issues. Some have been in the army, have got PTSD, drug and alcohol addictions, and actually helping people work through those addictions and problems is more important than just giving somebody a roof over the head for the short term. And to get people back being productive members of society, we've been doing that now in the city for about 2 years, and I think it's a really good scheme. Mel Beck and the BID are really involved in helping us with that, as are other organisations like the Winter Night Shelter. So we already had a good offer. What the pandemic has allowed us to do, in some effect, is build on that and engage with people who wouldn't necessarily have engaged with us. And it's also, I think, shown that rough sleeping is doable. Getting people off the streets is doable if there is a will to do it. And it's also shown people that there are people in the city who are not rough sleeping, they are just begging. And it's a very different cohort of people. And it's allowed us to say, well, actually, everybody is entitled to a roof over their head tonight. Anybody that's asking you for money and telling you who normally tells you the council isn't helping them, it's not true. Don't give those people cash. You're just enabling addiction. You're enabling often those people to be exploited. And actually, the help and support is there. It wasn't possible for a lot of those people who are exploiting people to argue back, because people knew that support was there. And now we're able to take that work forward and say that support is still there. So please, if somebody's sitting outside of M&S or sitting outside of Primark or other stores, please don't give them cash. Donate on one of the touch points in the city centre. By all means, have a conversation. See if they want you to buy them food, but certainly refer them on to one of our support workers or one of the BID support workers, and they can get accommodation and they can get other support for their issues.
That's a very interesting point that you make. It's great that hopefully there will be some long-term positives to come from this dreadful situation, and knowing how to engage with people that are begging is very helpful. So long may that continue, and let's hope that is, as you say, it's a problem that can be fixed and is well on its way to being fixed. Thank you. The next question, with no deaths for the last 25 days and only 3 new cases of coronavirus reported in June in Milton Keynes. Milton Keynes is now one of the least infected places in England, which is obviously great news, but it's also in stark contrast to our geographical neighbour in Bedford. I just wondered, do you think that our extensive road infrastructure, wide boulevards, network of redways, and the modern offices and shopping centre, have they helped, and will they help us make a speedier recovery than other areas of the UK?
Now, there's a question. I think why Milton Keynes wasn't affected. I think I'm not a scientist, so I can't give you definites. I'll give you my opinion, and that is, I think our green space in particular played a large part, and I think it does come down to actually the citizens of Milton Keynes and the people of Milton Keynes really did play their part. There is good evidence to show that we abided by lockdown a lot more than other cities. If you actually, in one sense, I was lucky enough to be able to come into the office every day because that's my job, and I had to do that because we were monitoring the situation. But literally, the city centre was deserted. I went down to the stadium at one point to do an interview with MKFM, and literally there was nobody there. In other cities, that didn't quite ring true. So the public really played their part in staying at home and keeping the NHS safe. I think our relationship, both as a place and particularly as a council, and the work that we've done, that relates back to the first question, the long-term work that we've done as a city with our care sector in particular meant that we were able to get people out of hospital a lot earlier than other places were. So when lots of places had to wait 2 or 3 weeks to empty hospitals to make sure that the NHS had the capacity to take what was expected to be a rush of people, in Milton Keynes we've done that around the time of the people coming to Kent's Hill and a little bit afterwards. But that's only because we've had 4 or 5 years of good working with the hospital, and then you come back to green space and the fact that you could remember those heady days of staying in your house and going for one walk and sort of ordering your supermarket online or going to the supermarket once a week. Sort of, you could go out for your daily walk, your government mandated exercise, and you literally wouldn't see another person because we've got so much good green space in the city. And I think that really did play its part. I don't necessarily think that our housing density played a part, because we have particularly low, high housing densities in Stony Stratford and Wolverton and Bletchley, and they were similarly not affected in the same way that Bedford has been affected. But and Bedford Borough, I think Bedford Borough is similar to Milton Keynes, is that you think of Bedford as a town, but actually Bedford Borough is quite a lot of villages as well as Bedford itself. And so when we talk about Bedford's infection rate, it's in fact Bedford Borough, which takes in the rural hinterland just as much as Milton Keynes has rural hinterland. So I'm not sure it's housing density, but I do think certainly green space has played its absolute part. But I think front and centre is the fact that the vast majority of our population stuck by the rules, they stuck to them well, they followed the guidance, and we are paying dividends for that. But we're not complacent. We have got a controlling COVID plan that we're having to put together, because people will be aware that the future is about local lockdowns and the control of individual, say, organisations or breakouts if they be geographic. And we're not complacent. We're doing lots of testing. We're making sure that our public health team are in contact with not just businesses but other organisations like schools, that if you do have an outbreak, and we're talking to business leaders here, I think it's difficult, but if we're talking to business leaders, if somebody's feeling unwell, send them home, get in contact with people who can do the test and trace, and actually for a very small amount of, for that quick action, you're probably going to save a lot of long-term pain. That actually, if somebody stays at work for the day, they're going to infect more people. Your business is going to be out of play for longer. So, sort of, I know the government have, when we're recording this, it's Tuesday. The government have just relaxed a few rules, but actually sort of, it's good for business that people stick by those rules, and we remain diligent.
Yeah, it's been remarkable how well observed it has been. My own firm, Interact, I think we're now in our 14th week. It was the week after when we last saw each other in the flesh at the Achievement Awards. And we're very lucky in that we can work from home. But even now, why take the risk? And if anybody's ill, I completely agree. It makes a lot of sense that if you can work from home and you're lucky enough to be in that situation, that you do. You mentioned how empty the city centre was, which obviously neatly segues me to my next question. Because obviously your parking revenues are significantly down as a result. And it was reported, I believe, back in April that the crisis could potentially blow a £37 million hole in the finances of the council. So my question is, have further funds been forthcoming from central government, and have they been sufficient to protect Milton Keynes from what might be a sort of stringent set of cuts in your budget?
So the government have provided about £40 million worth of funding, and that has been helpful to deal with the outbreak in the emergency phase. And certainly when it came to things like buying PPE, we were I think our staff really stepped up to the mark on that. We were working with the hospital. One of the reasons I think why we don't have we've had some difficult situations in the city, and obviously we think around 200 to 300 people have died in the city because of COVID, and that is really sad. But one of the things that we're able to do that perhaps didn't happen in other areas is we never ran into those shortages of PPE. And as our social care team, we took our advice and we went beyond what the government was expecting us to do. So we had enough PPE to be able to say to our care workers, for instance, if it makes you feel safer and you want to wear a mask, wear a mask. And actually that has blocked, I think, people that, particularly care workers who were doing visits, because it would be easy for the government, I think, to rewrite history on some of the advice that was given. The advice until relatively recently was if people were not symptomatic, i.e. they didn't have a cough or a temperature, actually you were not to take any action, and there was no testing. And now I think the evidence is quite strong that lots of people are asymptomatic but never show any symptoms but are able to pass it on. We were able to say to our care workers, you can wear PPE. So that funding was helpful in doing that. But what it won't do is that funding has now effectively ceased. And the Local Government Association, which is a cross-body organisation that represents local authorities, say I think there's going to be about a £10 billion shortfall. Milton Keynes, we've done some work on it, and actually now it's gone up to about £55 million shortfall, and that's a moderate outlook. So I'll give you an example. The collection rate on council tax is usually about 99.6%, and we collect around about £100 million of council tax every year. Collection rate at the moment is around 94%. So that is effectively a £6 million cut to the money that we're getting in, because money that we don't get in or we can only take in over the long term is money that we can't spend. And it's very similar with business rates. So we have been provided with quite a lot of money to give a lot of businesses some business rate holidays and some grants. But what it doesn't do is replace Debenhams, and what it doesn't do is replace some of those businesses that unfortunately aren't going to be able to open the doors again. So whereas in our budget we always plan for an increase in business rates, because you would imagine Milton Keynes is a growing place, business rates are going to increase. We're building more space in Magna Park, for example, every year. We're not expecting that increase, so that is already a real terms cut in our budget. But not only a business rate's not going to increase, they're likely to decrease as well. So all these things plus increased spending is likely to just widen that gap, and it is going to be difficult. And so the LGA continue to lobby government around increasing funding for local authorities. I don't think we can go through another 10 years. don't think anybody, any political party in Milton Keynes really expects the council to be able to cope with that. I think there is a little bit of cross-party support in that the government probably needs to do more. But also, I think Milton Keynes, in one sense, is a unique example. If Milton Keynes isn't growing and isn't producing tax for the Treasury, then the Treasury aren't going to be able to level up Burnley and Scunthorpe and all those places in the north that need investment. So a little bit of investment in Milton Keynes to keep people in jobs and to keep the council going, I think, pays dividends in terms of tax and jobs that will be able to rebalance those Treasury books. That means they can invest elsewhere. So yeah, I think unlike other places that hold their hand out and say we need money because we need to provide services, I think in Milton Keynes we've got a really strong narrative that can say what can we do to, if we are giving this extra funding, and what benefit can we provide the government.
So reasons to be reasonably cheerful, well, not cheerful, but at least optimistic that we will weather the storm because of the strength of the community and the business sector. And obviously when we get the hospitality sector back, which is a big area, I'm sure you'll have spoken with DMK about that. You know, hopefully that will add another accelerant to our recovery. Thank you. So, Pete, according to recent figures, the unemployment rate in Milton Keynes is 6.2% versus 2.7% this time last year, which I guess isn't surprising, and even higher rises in areas such as Bletchley. I think I've also read that, very sadly, the most affected age range is 18 to 24, and there's evidence that suggests that this can affect their lifelong earning potential. What will the council be doing to support these people? And is the situation likely to get even worse?
So I think if you go back again to that first couple of weeks of lockdown, when the government messaging was very strong around, if we just get through this and do this for 12 weeks, the economy will we'll park the economy and we'll start up again in 13 or 14 weeks. I think that message has significantly changed, and I think you'd have to be quite silly to not notice that the Chancellor is now talking about quite a deep and long recession, and I would imagine that's the case, and that's difficult. Obviously, the first thing was to make sure that we got passported that money that we were given from government out as quickly as possible to the businesses that qualified with business rate grants and things like that. But also, we've used an extra £2 million discretionary fund to fill in the gaps, and 18 to 24-year-olds are always going to be hit, I think, hardest in any downturn, because often though that age group are in transitory work, they'll be doing things like you just mentioned, the hospitality sector. They'll be working secondary jobs, whether they're at college or university. You and I know that we often attend the college awards and all those people that work for the college's brilliant sort of catering business and things, and who are getting that experience, who are then able to go on and work in restaurants and the catering industry. They won't be getting that experience because the business is just not there to do the work for to then go on into a more commercial environment. And I think that's really difficult. The Dons aren't doing the usual stuff, and you know, we just had the snooker there. I mean, you mentioned earlier that the last time we met in the flesh was the BAAs, all those people that sort of you notice and don't notice, the people who serve us, the people who do the background stuff, the people, all that industry is generally served by a lot of people who are in that age bracket. And when the snooker was there, none of that was taking place because it was effectively people were in the hotel rooms, they were being served food in their rooms, they were going to play the match, there was no crowd, then they were going straight back to the hotel rooms. It is really difficult. And so what we intend to do is, in the next couple of weeks, we are currently working on a council support package that will bring forward, reprioritise some of the spending of the council. We're working with business, and I know you're working with the new portfolio holder around what support we might give to existing businesses, how we might prioritise new businesses that are starting up, particularly in the green economy. Because if we think about why we did all that MK Futures work. Why we did all that MK Futures work was to say, at some point or other, the economy or life, as we might know, will change. You know, it changed for Manchester, it changed for Liverpool. We stopped making cotton, and that industry changed. The reason why we did MK Futures was to say, at some point, AI or whatever it may be will change the face of the economy, and Milton Keynes was in a risky position. It's got a lot of back office functions. It's got a lot of jobs that are in danger of automation, and I think some of that will be accelerated. And therefore, we've got to think as a local authority and as a place about how we can support the next generation of jobs for long term around the green economy, around sustainability, but also do more interesting things and support people who would give, in terms of the council spend, a lot of value added in council spend. So, for instance, we're looking at a package to support women in work and women back into work, because actually a recent study from the Fawcett Society was quite clear that a lot of the impact of COVID has fallen disproportionately on women, disproportionately on young women, and the first people to effectively be made redundant are often women. And if we don't get them back into work quickly, they spend longer out of work, longer being needed to be retrained, and therefore we're looking at a package around supporting women back into work, because I think the more the council spends on that, the less we would have to, for instance, spend on temporary accommodation or child benefit and things like that in the future. So being nimble as a council, I think, is really important, and not just, I think, giving sort of blanket, here's £100 to do this, but more actually, if the council's got a certain amount of money to spend with business, where do we get the biggest bang for our buck in terms of reskilling or upskilling people?
I would think with the work that you can do through Invest Milton Keynes also, if there's a bigger pool of talent available, it might hopefully make it more attractive, as an even more attractive place for businesses to start thinking about relocating, in particular because of all the great infrastructure that we have, and as you mentioned, the green spaces. So hopefully if a city is to recover quickly, it will be Milton Keynes, and hopefully, as I say, that will take along our hospitality sector and our younger demographics. We need those guys to be working.
Yeah, and I think keeping some of that investment going, particularly in the city centre, keeping those cranes popping up. We've got Hotel Le Tour coming, obviously, that's just started. Saxon Court, the developers for that are very keen to keep going. We've got the Renaissance CMK project. Now, all these things, it's really vital that the city continues to, and some of the onus is on me to persuade our planning committee to approve those things and be nimble and not sort of, I think sometimes in the past, but particularly we've been guilty of thumbing our nose to inward investment, sort of like, well, Milton Keynes, we're always going to create jobs, but particularly with the levelling up policy of the government, we are, I think, going into a recession that will be very competitive to get out of. A lot of those places that we talk about, like Manchester and Liverpool, Birmingham, have now got very prominent directly elected mayors in Andy Burnham and Andy Street in Birmingham and Steve Rotherham in Merseyside, who are creating a lot of noise on the national scene about investment in infrastructure in the north, investment in green jobs. And actually, if you're the government and you've got £1 to spend, are you going to spend it somewhere that makes it really difficult to spend it, or are you going to spend it somewhere that's asking for it and really needs it? And so I think the onus is on the council, and in no small measure councillors, to be open to business and open to inward investment and create the policy framework to make sure that actually we are a place that people want to come and invest, and keeping those cranes on the skyline creates that sense of momentum that actually we are still a place that is doing well and people want to come and do business and isn't a place on a downward curve. And that's all that the MK Futures and the strategy for 2050, that all that work, I think, needs to be brought together in we were doing it for a purpose, and that purpose is now. And I think yourself and other business leaders have got a really key ambassadorial role to play in when you go and you're eventually able to network again, talking up Milton Keynes, talking up our investment potential, talking up how great it is to live here and work here, because actually for every pound that's invested in here, we get a lot of money back, but also the competition for that money, I think, is going to be ferocious like never before.
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree with you more. We're very good at talking ourselves up in Milton Keynes, and rightly so. And I think we need to do that more than ever. I think I'm right in saying they've built a new Premier Inn, built and opened a new Premier Inn. Yeah. We've all been in lockdown too. So another positive. You mentioned a moment ago the new portfolio holder for business and economic development. What might we expect to see in terms of policy, and in particular a recovery plan? I know you've spoken to that already. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
So I think with Kel Baum, what you've got there is someone who's very experienced. She used to be a director of the High Orchestra in Manchester, so comes with a lot of business experience, and actually part of her job is to get out there. And I know she's been doing this on Zoom calls, and the business leaders have been really key in bringing together that forum, that it's not just the council telling business what they want, or not just the businesses telling the council what you need. Actually, there's a real partnership there with yourself, but also organisations like the BID around how we create that framework, because I think with the best will in the world, we are a council. Our sort of centre ground, our home base is about providing services, whether they be cutting the grass or filling potholes, or particularly around adults and children's social care. That's our home base. That's what we do the best. Actually, creating a good framework for inward investment is how we work with the college, how we work with skills providers, how we understand what businesses need, how we create a good framework. And I think what you'll find from Carol is the willingness to work, not just with businesses, but with the charity and the voluntary sector as well, and how we really get that value added out of the relationship, I think. And she's already been making great strides in that. And just in terms of policy, I think it is around, we want to get back to normal, but we can't go back to where we were, particularly in terms of how we were as a society. I don't think we can spend 10 or 12 weeks clapping for NHS and care workers and people who were helping us day in, day out at the height of lockdown in supermarkets, and then go back to paying them £8 an hour. It can't work like that. So actually going back is not an option. Getting back to normal is, but going back to how things were on. And so again, we come back to trying to work out supporting employers who pay the real living wage, how as a council that we are providing a platform for organisations and businesses that are looking to the future and providing sustainable jobs and green jobs. And I think that narrative, I think, will become more front and centre.
Yeah, I think one of our hopes, well, most people's hopes, right? People thinking hope, is that the sense of community that we've developed in the last 3 or 4 months persists beyond just the lockdown, and we do continue to come together and work as a viable society that genuinely has care for each other, concern for each other, and also the environment. Because I think one of the things that's become apparent to me is, if we think that the pandemic has been bad, then the impact of global warming and on the environment could be a lot worse. And we've made it work. We've made it work from working from home where we can. So I think there are lots of things to take from this period. And obviously there's been, as you said, lots of terrible things that we've had to deal with, but hopefully plenty of positives. It neatly leads me on. Sorry, Pete.
I know there is a perception around businesses, and particularly from some, that businesses are only out for themselves, and or a load of businesses, all they ever do is want to make money. you know and I know that that's not the truth, and that's not the case. For instance, I don't want to big you up or anything, Nick, but the business you run is really socially minded. You know, the businesses that don't have a foot in their community, particularly Milton Keynes, I think are very few and far between. And I think actually what the pandemic has shown is when it was required, most organisations, whether they be the council or businesses or community sector, most organisations stepped up when it was needed. And I think, I think we're going to go on and talk about unemployment, but actually, I think there is a recognition that this isn't a normal recession, that this isn't a normal case. Because I think if it was a normal recession, the first thing a lot of businesses would have done would have been to make staff redundant and to protect themselves. But actually, I think after 10 years of austerity and 10 years of really, it's been difficult for everybody, hasn't it? You know, it's not been a pleasant 10 years to live a life. I think a lot of organisations have turned around and actually said, we can't really go on like this. And I think most businesses in Milton Keynes, particularly where they're Milton Keynes based, really have a pride in the city, and that has really shone through. And it's about sort of continuing that and showing businesses in a really great light.
I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about partnerships. I think that's one of the things that we have in Milton Keynes now, is both in the business sector, we're famous for networking, so we build those relationships, but also increasingly in my experience with the council, and you know, I've only been chair for a little over a year now of business leaders, but there seems to be a real earnest dialogue now between businesses, and not just business leaders. There's obviously the business council as well, but there is an open dialogue now, and that through that you can develop a partnership and hopefully get things done. You mentioned employment. I was going to skip that one because I thought we maybe covered it, but I will bring it up. Obviously we've spoken about the unemployment, and that sadly leads to the expectation that businesses might be under threat and fold. You also mentioned earlier that you used £2 million in terms of a discretionary grants, which is great to hear. Do you feel that enough has been done for local businesses, and you know, in particular those that have fallen through the gaps, or could more be done, and should that be, presumably, imagine that should be funded from central government?
Well, obviously, if there's any money to be spent, it should come from central government. The reality is, I think, again, it's about everybody playing their bit. And we come back to that first question around why we were able to act in Milton Keynes. We're not in a strong financial position because no councils are, and it will only get worse. But I think over the next couple of months, we do have a little bit of extra funding left over from last year that we were going to spend on some nice to haves that I think we can reprioritise around supporting businesses. And I think that's absolutely key. And I know Carol and Emily Darlington and Jenny Wilson Marklew are working on a package around supporting businesses and improving skills and supporting women in work. So we'll be bringing that forward. And we did introduce a scheme, I think, with that £2 million, and I think we've had around 350 applications for those businesses that fell through the cracks, because if anywhere is going to have a lot of businesses that are nimble and flexible and didn't have their own premises but were renting space in the Regis building, for instance, or in Acorn House, that's where the government scheme was, for instance, giving the shopping centre the refund on the business rates, but actually not the shop itself. And so we set up that discretionary scheme, and we've had about 350 applications. And if you're a business that feel you fell through the cracks, for instance, you may have only been trading 18 months and not 2 years, or whatever the government guidance was. If you go online and apply for that scheme, it's a discretionary scheme, and hopefully you'll get that £10,000 or £25,000 grant.
That's good to hear. Really good to hear. But you've said that COVID-19 is a moment for collective importance and collective sacrifice. We've touched upon this already, but what do you see as the positives, or what positives do you hope will be the legacy of this period for the people of Milton Keynes?
Well, has somebody, I mean, there are lots, but I mean, my technical answer, so to speak, is I think, interestingly, local authorities are a little bit in the background of government. You know, if anybody ever wants anything done, they look to the central government and they look at the guy standing on the stage at 5 o'clock announcing these things as if those announcements in Westminster are somehow magically transformed into what happens on the ground. And one of my hopes, I think, is a renewed appreciation of what local government does in this country and actually what local government can achieve. Because without Milton Keynes Council and all those other councils up and down the country, regardless of political colour, without them, people would have gone without prescriptions, people wouldn't have had food packages delivered. You know, we've delivered over 4,000 packages with the food bank extra that we helped set up. You know, I think there was a renewed understanding that sometimes when the government says we, what they actually mean is the local authority will deliver on our behalf. And so I think one of my hopes is that people will look at local government and we might get a little bit more devolution in this very centralised country and a lot more spending directed locally at our discretion. So why that scheme, for instance, straight away was a very rigid scheme that couldn't take into account local circumstances. I know they wanted to do it quickly, but actually it left a lot of businesses really fearful. So hopefully a little bit more devolution and a little bit more power to local authorities, because actually I think we've been shown in the past couple of months to have really stepped up to the mark and genuinely saved lives. In terms of society, I think most people, hopefully, who are watching this, but most people like yourself know that I went through a bit of a crap situation last year, and I came out of that with a renewed sense of, I think people should just be kinder to each other. And I think both with COVID, but also what's coming out of Black Lives Matter in the past couple of weeks is hopefully a renewed sense of society and how we should actually be there for each other. And regardless of our background, whether it be a faith background or ethnic background or economic background, I think we could just, if sometimes we could all just pause before we said the shitty thing on Twitter to each other, or before we reposted that slightly racist thing or that slightly sort of ambiguous fact on Facebook. You know,
focusing on what we've got in common rather than what.
Yeah, exactly.
What's different.
And I think one of the things that I hope we take away is people who came and clapped on their doorstep. Most did that, I think, from a genuine feeling that they were grateful for those people that were helping them, or helping their grandparents, or doing things for other people. And I think we have to take that genuine gratitude and make sure that people don't forget it really quickly just because Primark has reopened, you know, because suddenly you've got people who it's really easy to furlough shame people, or it's really easy to say, why is this person going out to Primark? Well, actually, Primark don't have an online offer. You know, it's really difficult if you've got a 3-year-old with growing feet, and we went into lockdown in March, and suddenly it's 3 months later. You know, a 3-month-old is very different in size to a 6-month-old. Really, really easy to forget that Primark offer good value clothes. You know, and it's really easy just to repost something that somebody else has put on Facebook, sort of saying, "Oh, look at these idiots queuing at Primark." I think just taking that extra 10 seconds in life to be a little bit kinder to each other will probably go a long way to building a better society, and not people talk. I mean, everybody at the beginning of this was talking about, you know, the Blitz spirit and the spirit of the Second World War, and it's lived a long time in the memory, maybe with a bit of rose-tinted spectacles, but it's lived a long time in people's memories, I think, because there was a sense of national unity and national focus. And I think if we can just get people to remember that sense of unity, that sense of pride in place, the sense of we are all in this together, then I think it makes some of the decisions I make less political with a capital P and just about doing the right thing. I think the more that we can do that, I think the better everybody off will be, not just financially, but I think sort of socially and in terms of their happiness and general well-being.
I think that's a marvellous sentiment, Pete, and I second it straight away. I couldn't agree with you more. And with, you know, I have young adult children now, and I look to them and their idealism and their ambitions for the future. I can't help but feel in many ways, and they're the guys out doing the BML and campaigning for the environment. Can't help feel and hope, at least, that we're in safer hands. You said that right at the beginning you wouldn't have chosen to be in charge over this, but I wonder when you look back and start to write your memoirs, whether you feel that there's been lots and lots of positive things, both in terms of the decisions you made for the city and in terms of your own personal development and experience. I can't help but think that there probably is.
Well, I mean, you do what you do, and I think most of us, if you're put in a situation, you just get on with it, you know, and that's what I did. I mean, I have far more respect for. I've seen it day in, day out, of people getting up and coming into work, and there was that period, particularly between week 3 and week 8, where we were certainly at the peak of we can't beat about the bush about this. People were dying, and people continue to die of COVID, when we were having to do things like book out the ice rink, because there was the potential that we could have had quite a significant amount of excess deaths, you know. And actually, it's not what I did that really really makes me happy. It's actually knowing that there are members of staff in this building and organisations who work for charities and people who did things like deliver prescriptions or answer calls to the local support service, who really, really did make a difference in people's lives. And when I do our corporate induction here to new employees, I always say it's about the 5 minutes you give, but it's also about the fact that if people didn't need council services, we wouldn't exist. You know, you would have to set us up, because that's why we exist. And I said this at full council last week. At the moment of greatest need, Milton Keynes Council didn't step up. Milton Keynes Council is an entity. It's a thing. It doesn't exist. It's a building, and it's an organisation. People within our organisation stepped up and did those things, and that's what makes me immensely proud. And people in charities, people in businesses, people who work for Sainsbury's and Asda and Marks and Spencer's, who went into work, particularly in those first few weeks, without PPE, without those screens up, who were going in and doing shifts, people in the NHS, they stepped up to the mark, and we should be immensely proud of them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Pete, it's been a really wonderful opportunity to catch up with you. I just want to leave you with one last question. And obviously we're a business community. I represent the businesses in our community. What I'd like to know is, what do you think that we could do going forward to help? You've already mentioned bigging up Milton Keynes, but are there other things that we can do as a collective of businesses to benefit our city and to speed up our recovery?
So, I mean, I think the main thing, and we've talked about it, is keeping that confidence in the city, because the vast majority of economic output, I think, in this country, particularly at the moment, is going to be based on the confidence that it will be better in the future, the confidence to keep investing, the confidence to keep that person on. But things might be difficult at the moment, but you will win that next contract. And I think just giving, as the council leader, to say we are looking at things like how we can improve granting contracts to more local businesses, making sure that more businesses that are based in Milton Keynes get a bigger take of what the council spend, knowing that, you know, that pipe, making sure that you know that some of those, and have confidence that some of those things in your pipeline you will land. And so keep that person on, because it's much more difficult to then go out and look for another person and train them up, because that person's gone on to move for somebody else and perhaps keeping them on. Having those conversations, there might be difficult conversations with people to say, look, I can't afford to keep you on at your current rate, but maybe you could take a 10% pay cut, or maybe you could work 4 days instead of 5 days a week for a little bit. Being flexible as a business. Maybe we can look around how we support that as a local authority and ask government to support that flexibility. I think sort of looking at different ways of doing things. I think, but the main thing I would say is it's keeping that confidence in us as a place that it will get better. We are going to go through a difficult patch, but a difficult patch in Milton Keynes is nothing. Believe me, I grew up there. A difficult patch in Milton Keynes is going to be nothing to what some of those places some of those people in other places face. We are situated in such a good place. We've got the Oxford-Cambridge Arc. We are literally 50 minutes away from from London, and an hour and a half away from Manchester on the train, and an hour away from Birmingham. We are brilliantly placed, and we do have that foundation to mean that we'll continue to be that good place, because like I said about the futures work, we've been preparing for this, and we've been sort of softening the ground for, at some point something will come along that challenges the way that we do things, but we need to be prepared. I think we've got that good foundation, and we need to be confident in the city going forward.
I couldn't agree with you more. And again, I think it's how we come together and support each other as businesses and business organisations as well. The more that there will be some businesses that are doing very well and others that are really struggling, and we really need to try to come together to support those that aren't doing well, because we're going to be a better off society if we have a lot of successful businesses.
Yeah, our networks are great here. One of the things that we have to remember is I think it's like over 70% of our employment are small enterprises that employ less than 10 people, who often, I'm on the LET board, so often they don't have the capacity or expertise to go and network in the same way slightly larger businesses do. And so it's how we ensure that those businesses are part of that conversation, I think, and how we're bringing and how we're working with the Federation of Small Businesses to bring them into the conversation, where, particularly the council, it's easy to say, oh, it's on E10, but if you're a one-man band, you have the time to go and fill in sort of 20 pages of forms to sort of win a contract when actually you're out doing the work. It's little things like that making sure that we're trying to include as many people in the conversation as possible, but also when it comes to, say, you awarding a contract or going out and finding somebody to do something for you, actually making sure there's a wider network as possible, that it's really easy to look at somebody and find a consultant to do some consultancy work who's based in London, and now we're based on Teams and Zoom. It's even easier to find somebody based in Manchester or Leeds, as those are tech, sort of high-tech areas. But there's probably somebody just down the road in Monkston or in Shenley doing that work, but isn't necessarily sort of quite as high profile on Google. So it's just trying to understand that we've got a lot of people in the city that are able to do that work and are probably really keen to do it, and we should be awarding more of our work locally, having that circular economy in the place. Yeah,
I couldn't agree. There's very little, I think, that couldn't be done in Milton Keynes if people are minded to find those firms that can do that. Peter Marland, from leader of Milton Keynes Council, I really thank you very much for your time and your very honest answers. It's been wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.